We're back here on Ceraulo Sports Talk, and joining the show up next, as promised, he's a former Houston Astro. He is a 2005 World Series hero, ironically, against the Astros, and of course, one of the co-hosts of our Believe in Astros show right here on the Believe Network, Geoff Blum. Geoff, thanks so much for joining the show.
I appreciate the opportunity. It's a good time for the Astros, and it's a good time to be on your show.
Yeah, it's a great time to be talking about your Astros, man. So let's dive in. I'm ready to call this team a dynasty. I know that they've only won one World Series, but 6 straight ALCS appearances, 4 straight World Series appearances now. Do you think this is the best of, the last 6 years of Astros teams that we've seen?
Yeah, you know what? If you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I probably would have argued the fact that maybe there's some teams during the 80s that might have been, the better era of baseball. They're notorious with my generation of Astro fans. But now we have this new generation that is watching probably the most unbelievable and greatest era of Houston Astros baseball that we've seen. They were predominantly in the National League up until 2013. And for the last 10 years, they've been in the American League. And they've gone to the ALCS 60% of the time, which is ridiculous to think about. And obviously setting an American League record by going to the 6 straight championship series. But these guys have done, it's on the field. Everybody wants to talk about what's on the field, but you got to kind of peel back that onion a little bit and go back to what Jeff Luhnow, amazingly enough, started with his draft classes, some of the waiver claims. And that's why you have so many guys playing well for this long to create an idea of a dynasty.
Now, Geoff, I don't want to jump the gun on this one. Obviously, to be considered, they've got to go win the World Series. But
yeah,
we've seen great teams. I just want to talk my lifetime, right? Last 25 years or so. We've seen the Mariners go and win 116. This year's Dodgers won 111. Neither of them got it done at the end. But is this Astros team, forget just, the Houston Astros franchise, is this the best team maybe we've seen 1 to 26 in the past couple decades?
I tell you what, having been lucky enough to be on the call for the last 10 years and seeing this run of Astros baseball, until they got to 106 wins, until they've won their first 7 and have the potential to sweep a postseason, which I don't think has ever been done, which is ludicrous to think of, because in the playoffs, you've got the best of the best playing in the postseason. But if they do end up winning this World Series, I would have to say that this is the best Astros team ever. And that would, I have a hard time saying that, just because calling the season of 2019, when they were putting up numbers offensively that were in comparison for the Bronx Bombers of the New York days in the the late 1920s, that's when I kind of sat back and said, oh my gosh, we are watching the greatest baseball team in Astros history in 2019. And then you went out there and you had Garrett Cole, Justin Verlander, Lance McCullers, all these guys in this fantastic bullpen and pitching staff to match up with the offense. But you have a very good offense in 2022, but this pitching staff and what this rotation has been able to do throughout the course of the season and into the postseason, and then to have a lockdown bullpen that is as consistent and as good as they are right now, they win that World Series, they would probably put themselves at the top of the list, saying that they were the best Astros baseball team in franchise history, hands down.
And it's crazy because you mentioned the bullpen, right? And one thing I've been telling people is Philly, top 2 guys, maybe even 3 guys in their rotation, they can go head to head, put them up against almost any other team in baseball, right? Wheeler, obviously, as good as anyone. Nola, when he's on, same sentiment there. And Suarez, same goes for him. I mean, he's still climbing up the ranks, still a young kid, but he's shown tremendous flashes. But it's when you look at the bullpen, Philly's had some great performances from, Sir Anthony Dominguez, Alvarado, David Robertson. But if you get to a Phillies starter early, you could really be setting them up for a disaster the rest of the series. Whereas Houston, if, say Verlander gets touched up, you've got 2 great starters in Garcia and Urquidy that can come out of the bullpen. And, you're not having to go through Abreu, Neris, Presley, Stanek, Montero right off the bat. It's the depth that they have in their bullpen, and having, 6 starting pitching options. It's just, I've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, they've got legit 6 guys on that roster that have been stretched out and are able to go deep enough. And you saw it in that Seattle Mariners series with that first game where they got to Justin Verlander, but they continued to bring guys out of the bullpen that kept the game right where it was at and allowed enough time for that offense to come back and win that ball game with a phenomenal walk-off home run from Yordan Alvarez. And then you fast forward to game 3 where they went 18 innings and had, Lance McCullers goes 6 shutty. And then you had Luis Garcia come out of the bullpen later in that game, and he went 5 or 6 shutout. And hearing Josh Miller, the Astros pitching coach, talk about it after the game, he's like, we could have played about 30 innings if you wanted to, because we had Jose Urquidy waiting in the wings behind Luis Garcia, who stretched out and could probably give you 5 or 6 innings. So it's kind of an embarrassment of riches for them and the ability to go out there and use those guys. But to your point about the bullpen, Ryan Presley is the quote unquote closer. He is closing those games. So he's got the 9th. But Dusty Baker has the opportunity from the 6th inning on to mix and match whoever he wants out there, because he has guys with closing ability, and Ryan Stanek, Hector Neris, Brian Abreu, Rafael Montero. And that's what makes those games a little bit easier and takes maybe a little bit of stress off the starting rotation, who absolutely lives to go 6 innings.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Like I said, I've never seen anything like the rotation depth they have. And then the bullpen, having 4 guys who, there have been points throughout the season where I've said Presley, no disrespect to him, but may not have been their best reliever. I mean, there are stretches where I thought Stanek was the best guy in there. And then Montero got hot. And it's ridiculous. But looking at your opponent, looking at the Philadelphia Phillies, what impresses you the most about this team that didn't clinch a postseason berth until the second to last day of the regular season?
Yeah, I'm actually thoroughly impressed. And we got to remind ourselves that Joe Girardi was the manager of this team early on. You kind of forget about it because of how well Rob Thompson has done in getting this group to finally believe in themselves. You and I look at a piece of paper and you see that roster and you're going, dude, these guys are going to be great. But it wasn't until Rob Thompson moved in and really got these guys believing, and really everybody pushing in the right direction and everybody believing in themselves, and then believing in that other guy that's next to them. And that's why they're playing so well. But there's nothing worse than facing a team that has nothing to lose, like the Phillies. And then you also put into the fact that they're on an absolute heater right now, with their pitching is getting good. They're playing just good enough defense, but the timely hitting they're getting with the power is what's really remarkable to me, and kind of, sets up for the great pitching versus the great hitting in the Philadelphia Phillies. And that's where the Astros are going to have to make adjustments. They're going to have to limit walks, because if you limit walks, then you have the solo home run, and you don't necessarily get beat by the solo home run. It's when you give up the damage, the multiple home runs, or the multiple run home runs, where you have the 2-3 run home run on, and you're like, oh man, now we got a hole to dig out of. But this Phillies team is lightning in a bottle right now. They're getting great at bats. You've got Schwarber, even if he puts together such a good at bat that you say he's struggling, yet he still gets on base. That's what's frustrating about him. And if he gets going, he's going to hit 450-foot bombs. Bryce Harper's timed up at the right time, and Rhys Hoskins been an absolute menace at the plate with his timely home runs.
Yeah, I mean, Hoskins is a guy who all season it was like, when's he finally going to wake up? And, he chose the right time. Yeah, it's all about timing. I've drawn a lot of comparisons between this Phillies team and last year's Braves squad, because people are quick to forget.
Yeah.
The Braves this year, 101 wins. They were favorites, start to finish. Everyone was always scared of Atlanta. But last year, they were an 88-win division champ that, people were like, Dodgers will make quick work of them in the NLCS, right? And they end up being champs because of timely hitting, timely home runs, unsung heroes, guys like Jock Peterson, Eddie Rosario. Do you see an eerie comparison here between these two teams?
Yeah, I apologize for my dog chiming in.
Didn't even hear it.
Okay. But no, I think there are some comparisons, and that's where you get those guys that have that belief that they can go out there and compete with anybody out there. And that's really what the Braves and Snicker established late in that season. And being able to set a game plan and execute a game plan like the Braves did last season against the Dodgers and going out and beating them, I think that the Phillies may have learned a little bit from watching those guys and kind of adapted it to their situation here in the championship series, going against the San Diego Padres. But getting past some of those teams earlier in the rounds is, if we get saying to yourself, if we keep these games close, we're one swing away. Bryce, Kyle Schwarber, Rhys Hoskins, some of these guys can surprise you. All of a sudden, you've got a home run and the game is over. But getting to those guys in the back end of the bullpen is everything. So I think it's great to see guys like Nola stepping up, seeing Zach Wheeler. Who knew he had 98 sitting in the tank with 92-mile-an-hour cutters? He looks absolutely devastating. It's a good matchup, right-handed pitchers against a heavy right-handed hitting lineup in the Astros. So things are kind of lining up in the same direction. But that kind of goes back to your point with the Braves. They got very good pitching at the right time, and then they got that timely hitting. And you're going to have some of those surprises when you get into these series where pitching staffs are able to match up and pitch accordingly to try and suppress some of those bigger names that we talk about, you're going to have like the Gene Seguras or some of those other guys in the bottom part of the lineup step up and do something. And the Astros have actually had a couple of guys like Chas McCormick step up and do that. You need those guys.
Yeah, McCormick's home run at Yankee Stadium. Look, as a Met fan, I'm not going to hide it. I can't stand the Yankees. That was a perfect
Join the
Yankee
club.
Stadium home run. 314 feet, front row. I mean, that
Yep.
was, you got to adjust to the park that you're playing in. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Maldonado.
Well, and the roof was even open. Who knew?
Yeah.
Jeez.
I will say Maldonado, too, has had some really timely hits. He's been good
Yeah.
at flipping the lineup over. And, Altuve, while he's had, in large part, a really disappointing postseason, it's so important for that 9-hitter, especially a guy like Maldonado, who's in there 95% of the reason is for his glove. But to flip the lineup the way he's done, set up Pena, with guys on base, Alvarez, of course, it's just been 1-9, no easy out. It's really been incredible to watch. I do want to ask, because we're talking about the Phillies, I mentioned they clinched on the second to last day of the season. What are your thoughts on the new playoff format? Do you think that there should be any reform? The Astros, 1 seed, haven't lost a game. It hasn't affected them. But in the National League, the lower seed has won every series this postseason. So are you a fan of the new format with the bye weeks? What do you think about that?
It's kind of tough because we all know that baseball is a rhythmic type sport, especially for hitters. Pitchers, I think, are able to take those longer breaks and be able to bounce back because you'll be in the bullpen, not pitch for 5 days. You'll come out and shove. Starting pitchers go once every 5 days. So there's kind of, they have their rhythm with those days off built in. But I think hitters are the ones that really have the issue. Do they have the ability to adapt and really get back into the timing and rhythm of their swing and seeing the pitch out of the hand? And that's where the issue is created. And that's where a lot of the conversations are going to be had. But I said this before the playoffs even started. I said all it's going to take is a Yankee team to get knocked out or a Dodger team to get knocked out before you go, we have to change the format because we're losing big market teams and we're losing 111 win teams. But at the same time, the beauty of it is that you can have a run like the Philadelphia Phillies or get the San Diego Padres to upset the Dodgers to really create an interesting storyline in the National League Championship Series. And it goes back to March Madness. Everybody loves a great Cinderella story, but by the end of it, usually the better team will end up winning. So, being in Houston, I hope that's what happened, but I think it's a lot of fun to really bring the attention to a Phillies team that is very good. The only issue I would have right now as we stand is with the second round seeding. So you have the wild card teams playing. I would like to see it reseed itself when you get to that division series, because if you're the Dodgers, you'd rather play the lowest seed on there. If you're the Astros, you'd rather play a lower seed than the Seattle Mariners if there is one that advances. I think the NHL does that, and I think that might be the only adjustment I would make to it right now. But with the lockout removed next year, maybe it's easier to line these things up and create a little less space in between.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think that's a great idea, the proposal of reseeding, because when you win 111 games, you should be able to play the, quote unquote, easiest remaining opponent. Jeff, before we wrap it up, I want to give you your propers here. A thing or two about being clutch in the World Series. Ironically, though, you spent 5-6 years with Houston, and your big moment came in your 1 year on the south side of Chicago against the Houston Astros, a team that, like potentially this Astros team, start to finish was just a juggernaut, swept Houston in the World Series. Walk us through that 14th inning home run for the White Sox, man.
Yeah. I've been working tirelessly as a broadcaster trying to make up for that 2005 season. But going back in time, we just hinted at it. And, I mentioned, there's some guys in the bottom part of the order that are going to have an opportunity to have an impact. And that's kind of where I found myself back before the DH was instituted full time. There was an opportunity in a National League ballpark to have the double switches, to have the pinch hits. And it took a 14 inning game to sneak me in there. And, truth be told, in that 14th inning, I was coming up third behind Jermaine Dye and Paul Konerko. And in my mind, I'm getting mentally prepared. I'm like, man, Jermaine Dye can't get out. He's going to be on base. Paul Konerko's been crushing the baseball. I'm going to have to bunt. In my head, I was like, man, I'm going to have to lay down a sacrifice bunt in my only at bat in the World Series. And unfortunately, or fortunately in this case, Konerko hit into a double play, and it kind of settled me down a little bit. I was more nervous about trying to bunt than having at bat. And I stepped into the box. I knew that my former team and former teammates had a pretty good book on me. And I just sat on a fastball away and, trying to get a base hit and move it along for Aaron Rowan and Joe Creedy behind me. And, Ezekiel Estacio misses his spot by a good 1.5 foot and throws it into that happy spot. And I just went dark, dropped the barrel, and it shot it out of the ballpark. And for the greatest moment of my career.
Incredible, incredible. And now you've got a statue to commemorate that forever alongside. I mean, how cool is that for you? Look, I promise, zero disrespect, but to be a part of that statue with a guy like Paul Konerko, who obviously had, a borderline Hall of Fame career. And who else is on that statue? Juan Uribe.
Uribe.
Yeah, I mean,
Konerko was on there a couple of times for what he did in the World Series.
How incredible is that for you?
It's hard to explain. I've been asked that question so many times, and I really don't have a legitimate or go-to answer, just because every time somebody says, oh man, Geoff Blum statue, it doesn't really register or compute. And the fact that it's out there, and the fact that when my daughters are giving me a hard time saying you're a washed up athlete, you did, what'd you do in your career, I can always take them to Chicago and go, well, look, I did one thing right.
Yeah.
And that was hit that ball out of the ballpark. But I'm eternally grateful for what the White Sox have given me as far as opportunities, but also then to be remembered in that light is pretty special.
Not too many guys go somewhere for one season and get a statue out of it, man. It's like you, and if Brady had retired after his 1 year in Tampa Bay, you'd be in the same light there. Incredible.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, right? Yeah, total equals.
Geoff Blum, Tom Brady forever. I love it. I love it. Geoff, thanks so much for joining the show. That's former Houston Astro, 2005 World Series champ, and of course, current co-host of Believe in Astros, Geoff Blum. We'll be right back with my final word on Ceraulo Sports Talk.